There's a chemical conversation happening in your home right now, and you can't hear a word of it. It runs underneath the dinner table. It moves through the silence after an argument. It's in the way your shoulders sit when you walk through your own front door at the end of a long day. And your children are listening to all of it, not to your words, but to your nervous system. Here's what almost no one tells you. The single most powerful thing you will ever install in your child's brain is not a school, not a language, not a sport, not a savings account. It's the baseline state of your own mind, the regulated or dysregulated rhythm you carry without noticing. They absorb it the way they once absorbed oxygen through you, silently, completely, before they could choose. And if you're somewhere between 30 and 55, building a life, holding a family, carrying weight that the people around you can only guess at, then you already feel the cost of this. You just may have been told the wrong name for it. Stay with me, because in what follows, I'm going to show you 3 things that most people get exactly backward. The first is about your own brain, a specific structure that finishes forming far later than you were taught, and what that one fact rewrites about authority, patience, and why your children genuinely cannot decide some things for themselves. Not won't, cannot. The biology is unambiguous, and it changes how you parent the moment you understand it. The second is about a lie. A comfortable, modern, well-intentioned lie that an entire generation of good parents has swallowed whole. And it's quietly producing adults with no drive, no tolerance for discomfort, no engine. You're going to recognize it because you've probably been living inside it. And when you see the mechanism underneath it, you won't be able to unsee it. And the third is the blueprint itself, the actual re-engineering. How a parent's regulated mind becomes the operating system a child runs on for the next 40 years, and what it costs to install it correctly. Because it does cost. That's the part the motivational world refuses to say out loud. Let me prove the first one to you right now, so you know this isn't theory. Consider this. Somewhere in this country tonight, a 43-year-old father is negotiating with his 8-year-old about screen time. He's tired, he's been tired for years, and he's asking the child what the child wants, out of love, out of exhaustion, out of a sincere modern belief that this is respect. But the part of that child's brain responsible for weighing long-term consequences against immediate reward does not exist yet in any functional form. It is, biologically, under construction. The scaffolding is up. The wiring is incomplete. Asking that brain to choose its own limits is like handing the keys to someone who has never seen a road. And the child knows it. Some part of every child knows when the adult has quietly stepped down from the wheel. The father thinks he's giving freedom. What he's actually giving is the absence of a structure the child's own biology is begging for. This is the thing. We have spent 2 decades treating mental health, authority, and family stability as separate conversations, as if your anxiety lived in one room, your parenting in another, your marriage in a third. They don't. They were never separate. There is one nervous system running the whole house, and it's yours. You are not raising a child. You are raising a brain. And that brain is being built right now on the foundation of how stable you are when no one is watching. So the real question isn't whether you love your family. I already know you do. You wouldn't still be here otherwise. The real question is the one no one taught you to ask. What exactly are you installing? And what is it costing the people who can't yet tell you what they're absorbing? Let's go find out what's actually happening inside the brain. Because before you can change it, you have to see it. Watch what happens in a child's body the moment a parent walks into a room. Before a single word is spoken, the child's brain has already read you. Heart rate, posture, the micro-tension around your eyes, the rhythm of your breath. In under 300 milliseconds, faster than conscious thought, Their nervous system has decided one thing: is this environment safe, or is it not? This is not intuition. It's measurable. It's called neuroception, and it runs entirely below awareness. Your child is scanning you the way an animal scans a tree line, constantly, automatically, for one signal above all others: the state of the adult who is supposed to be in control. And here's what makes it extraordinary. Their internal state doesn't just respond to yours. It synchronizes with it. Researchers have measured this directly. When a parent and child sit together, their heart rhythms begin to align. Their stress hormones rise and fall in patterns that mirror each other. In studies of mothers and infants, the calm, or the chaos, in the parent's body became, within minutes, the calm or chaos in the child's. The technical term is co-regulation. The plain truth is harder to escape. Your nervous system is the thermostat for the entire house. Stop and sit with that for a second. It means that on the day you came home carrying something heavy and said nothing, you still said everything. The child didn't hear the problem. They felt the weather change. And a young brain has no way to interpret that weather except to assume it's about them, or that the world itself has become slightly less safe. Now this is where most people make their first mistake, and I want you to catch it before it costs you anything. They assume the goal is to feel calm, to never carry stress through the door. That's not the phenomenon. That's not even possible. The phenomenon is this. Children don't learn regulation from a parent who is always calm. They learn it from a parent who becomes dysregulated and then visibly returns. The repair is the lesson. The coming back is the curriculum. A child who watches an adult get angry, catch themselves, and restabilize is learning the single most valuable skill a human brain can hold: that a storm in the body is survivable and temporary. So the home where nobody ever loses their temper teaches nothing, and the home where the temper goes off and never comes back teaches the opposite of what you want. Here's another layer most people never see. A child's brain, in its first years, is producing synaptic connections at a rate the adult brain cannot approach. Over 1 million new neural connections per second at the peak. It is, quite literally, building the architecture it will use to interpret reality for the rest of its life. And the raw material for that architecture is experience. Specifically, the emotional experience of being near you. Every interaction is a deposit, not a metaphorical one, a structural one. The patterns repeated most often become the neural pathways laid down deepest. A child raised in predictable, regulated rhythm builds wide, stable roads for handling stress. A child raised in unpredictability builds narrow, hyper-vigilant ones, a brain wired to watch, to brace, to anticipate the next shift in the adult's mood. This is the observable layer. The what? The visible fact that the parent's mental state is not a private affair happening inside one's skull. It is a shaping force, physically constructing a second brain in real time, day after day, whether you intend it or not. But here's the question that should be bothering you now. If the parent's state is the thermostat, what actually sets the parent's thermostat? Why can two people face the same tired Tuesday and one comes home steady while the other comes home as a storm? That's not behavior. That's chemistry. And to change it, you have to go one level deeper, into the machinery that decides, long before you reach the door, what state you're going to be in when you open it. Let's go there next. So, what actually decides the state you're in when you walk through that door? 3 systems, mostly. And once you see how they work, you'll stop blaming your character for things that were always chemistry. The first is a hormone you've heard demonized and never properly understood. Cortisol. It gets called the stress hormone. as if it were the enemy. It isn't. Cortisol is the body's mobilization signal. It's what lets you wake up, focus, respond to a threat, meet a deadline. The problem was never cortisol. The problem is cortisol that never comes down. Here's the mechanism. When you live under chronic, unrelenting load, financial pressure, a strained marriage, work that never closes, the system that's supposed to release cortisol in a spike and then shut off stops shutting off. The off switch wears down. You end up living in a low, constant flood of it. And a brain marinating in chronic cortisol doesn't just feel tired. It physically changes how it operates. Specifically, it hands control to the wrong region. Picture two structures. Deep in the brain sits the amygdala, fast, ancient, built for one job: detect threat, sound the alarm. And above it, behind your forehead, sits the prefrontal cortex, slow, deliberate, the seat of patience, perspective, impulse control, the part that can pause before reacting. Under normal conditions, the prefrontal cortex governs. It keeps the alarm proportionate. But chronic cortisol flips the hierarchy. It strengthens the amygdala and weakens the prefrontal cortex's grip. So the same parent who is wise, patient, and measured on a rested Sunday becomes reactive and short on a depleted Tuesday. Not because their values changed, but because the threat detector seized the controls and the wise part went quiet. This is why you snapped at your child over something that didn't matter. It wasn't who you are, it was which structure was driving. Now the second system, dopamine. And this is where the modern world has played a quiet trick on every brain in the house. Dopamine is not the pleasure chemical, despite what you've been told. It's the pursuit chemical. It fires not when you get the reward, but when you anticipate it, when you reach for it, when you work towards something uncertain. Dopamine is the molecule of wanting, of drive, of the engine that gets a human out of bed and into effort. And here is the law that governs it, the one almost no one is taught. Dopamine is released most powerfully in the gap between desire and fulfillment. The reaching, the waiting, the earned arrival. Remove the gap. Deliver the reward instantly, endlessly, effortlessly, and the system that produces drive begins to go silent. Not because the person is lazy, because the chemistry of wanting requires a distance to cross, and you've erased the distance. Hold on to that. It's the hinge the entire next section turns on. The third system is the slow one and the most hopeful. Neuroplasticity. The brain's lifelong capacity to rewire, to weaken pathways it stops using and strengthen the ones it repeats. Every time you react one way, you deepen that groove. Every time you choose a different response and hold it, you begin carving a new one. The old road doesn't vanish overnight. The brain is built for energy economy and prefers the path already worn. But repetition is the chisel. What you practice, you become, not as a slogan, as a physical fact of tissue. Now put the three together, because this is the full machine. A parent under chronic stress runs on flooded cortisol, which hands the wheel to the amygdala, which makes them reactive in exactly the moments their child is reading them most closely. Meanwhile, the same parent, exhausted, depleted, reaches for the fastest dopamine relief available to quiet the load, and unknowingly models that exact shortcut for a watching brain. And neuroplasticity, indifferent to intention, faithfully records all of it. Carving the grooves in both brains. So the state you bring through the door was never a character flaw, it's a chemical equation. Cortisol, dopamine, plasticity, running whether you understand them or not. And the moment you understand them, something becomes possible that wasn't before. You stop fighting yourself. and you start engineering the inputs. But before we build, we have to name the lie. Because there's one belief held by the most loving parents alive that quietly sabotages every system we just described. Let's expose it. Here is the lie. And I want to be careful because it's worn by the most devoted parents you'll ever meet. The lie is this: that a good parent removes their child's discomfort. That love means smoothing the road. That if you have the means, the energy, the device, the resource to spare your child a moment of frustration, boredom, or wanting, you should. That the measure of a good home is how little the child has to struggle inside it. It sounds like love. It feels like love. And it is quietly dismantling the exact systems we just walked through. Go back to dopamine. The chemistry of drive lives in the gap between wanting and getting. The reaching is what builds the engine. Now watch what happens when a well-meaning parent, out of love or out of exhaustion, closes every gap. The child wants. The want is met instantly. The child is bored. A screen fills the silence before it can be felt. The child reaches. And there's nothing left to reach for because it already arrived. You haven't spoiled the child. That word is too small and too moral. You've done something more precise and more serious. You've removed the conditions under which drive is biologically built. A brain that never has to cross the distance between desire and fulfillment never develops the machinery for crossing distances at all. And then we look at that same child at 22, with no engine, no hunger, no capacity to tolerate the discomfort of effort, and we call them entitled. They're not entitled. They were never given the gap. Stop and feel the weight of that for a moment. The most loving thing many parents did, protecting their child from every discomfort, may be the precise thing that left the child without an engine. Now go back to the prefrontal cortex, that slow, deliberate seat of patience and impulse control. How does it strengthen? The same way any neural system strengthens, through use, through the repeated experience of wanting something and having to wait, of feeling frustration and surviving it intact. Frustration is not the enemy of a developing brain. Frustration is the resistance training. It is the load that builds the muscle of self-regulation. So when we engineer a childhood with no waiting, no boredom, no unmet wants, we don't produce a happier adult. We produce a fragile one. A brain that never built tolerance for discomfort because it was never asked to hold any. And here's the part that closes the loop I opened at the start. Remember the father asking his 8-year-old what the child wants? Now you see why that brain can't answer well. The prefrontal cortex that would weigh long-term good against short-term pleasure isn't finished. So when the adult abdicates the decision, the child defaults to the only system that is online, the immediate reward circuit, the amygdala, the want-it-now machinery. The child will choose the screen, the sugar, the easy thing, every time. Not because the child is bad. Because you asked a question to a part of the brain that hasn't been built yet. This is the error in its full shape. We confused the absence of discomfort with the presence of love. And in doing so, we starved the very systems that produce a capable human. The drive, the patience, the tolerance for effort, all of which biologically require, a certain amount of structured, survivable difficulty. Here is the contradiction that should reorganize how you see your own home. The discomfort you've been working so hard to remove from your child's life is not damage. It's the curriculum. The boredom you rush to fill is where imagination and self-direction are born. The waiting you hate to impose is where the dopamine system learns to value what's earned. The frustration you can't stand to watch is the prefrontal cortex doing push-ups. A childhood without difficulty isn't a gift. It's a deficiency, invisible, well-intentioned, and structural. And this isn't only about children. The same lie operates on you. Every time exhaustion sends you reaching for the instant fix to close your own gap, you're running the identical pattern, modeling it for a brain that's watching, carving the groove in two skulls at once. So the question is no longer whether you love them. It's whether you have the harder kind of love, the kind that can watch a child struggle, stay present through it, and refuse to rescue them from the very thing that's building them. Most parents never see this lie. But seeing it isn't enough, because there's a cost to having lived inside it. A cost that's already being paid in homes that look successful from the outside. Let me show you what that cost actually looks like. There's a 49-year-old woman in a quiet suburb outside Denver who did everything right. Or so the record would say. She built the kind of life people photograph. A house with more bedrooms than the family needed. A daughter, 15, with her own everything. Phone, tablet, a car already waiting for the birthday 2 years out. The woman had grown up with none of it. A childhood of going without, of wanting things the answer was always no to. And she made herself a promise somewhere in these lean years. My child will never feel that ache. She kept the promise. That's the part that matters. She kept it perfectly. Every want met. Every silence filled before it could turn to boredom. Every frustration smoothed over before it could sharpen into a tantrum or a tear. When the daughter was small and reached for something, it was already in her hand. When the girl got older and sighed at a long afternoon, there was always a screen, a ride, a purchase, a fix. The mother moved through her daughter's life like a person clearing snow off a path one step ahead of the footstep. Tireless, loving, always one move ahead of discomfort. And from the outside, it worked. The girl was pleasant, bright, easy. No tantrums, no struggles. A smooth, frictionless childhood. Exactly the one the mother had sworn to provide. Then the daughter turned 15, and the cracks started showing in a language the mother couldn't read. It began small. The girl couldn't sit with a closed door in a quiet hour. She'd start a book and abandon it on page 4. She quit the thing she was good at the moment they got hard. The instrument, the team, the class that finally demanded something, not from lack of talent, from something the mother had no word for. The moment any task asked her to cross a distance, to tolerate the gap between starting and arriving, she went hollow and turned away. What the mother saw as a phase was a brain that had never been allowed to build the engine. The dopamine system that fires for the earned reward had no grooves worn into it, because nothing in 15 years had ever required the reaching. The prefrontal patience that survives frustration had no resistance training, because frustration had always been intercepted at the door. The mother kept doing the only thing she knew. She closed the gaps faster, more support, more comfort, more rescue. And the more she removed the difficulty, the more incapable the girl became of meeting any, a loop tightening on itself, each loving act deepening the very deficiency it was meant to soothe. The fall, when it came, wasn't dramatic. There was no single catastrophe. That's what made it so hard to see. It was a Tuesday. The girl was 16 by then, sitting at the kitchen island, and a small assignment was due. Something minor, an hour's work at most. And she simply couldn't begin. Not wouldn't, couldn't. She sat there with the screen glowing and her eyes wet and said the sentence that finally landed in the mother's chest like a stone. I don't know how to make myself do things I don't want to do. And the mother understood, all at once and far too late, what she had actually built. Not a protected child, an unequipped one. She had spent 16 years removing every weight, certain she was giving her daughter a better childhood than her own, and in doing so had withheld the one inheritance that scarcity had accidentally given her: the knowledge that you can want and wait and work and survive the gap. She had been so determined to spare her daughter the ache of going without that she never noticed the ache was where her own strength had been forged. She sat down across from her daughter at that island, and for the first time in 16 years, she didn't fix anything. She didn't have a move ready. She just looked at this child she loved beyond reason and felt the full, quiet weight of a cost she hadn't known she was accumulating. Paid now, all at once, in a currency no comfort could buy back. That's where the story has to pause. Not at a tragedy. At a kitchen island, on an ordinary Tuesday, where a loving mother finally saw the bill. Because the cost we've been circling has a shape now, and it's time to name exactly what it is. Not in one family, but in the architecture of a generation. The mother at the kitchen island paid her bill all at once, but most families pay it slowly, in installments so small that no one ever traces them back to the source. Let me show you the true shape of the cost, because it's bigger than one fragile teenager, and it's already moving through homes that look, from the outside, like success. Start with the most direct price. A brain that never built tolerance for discomfort doesn't simply struggle with hard tasks. It roots around them permanently. The path of least resistance becomes the only path the nervous system knows. And because neuroplasticity faithfully deepens whatever gets repeated, avoidance itself becomes the wired-in default. By early adulthood, this isn't a habit anymore. It's architecture. The young adult who can't start the assignment becomes the one who can't finish the degree, can't hold the discomfort of a hard conversation, can't stay in the gap long enough for anything meaningful to be built. We diagnose it as a motivation problem. It was never motivation, it was a missing structure. Now layer in the second cost, the one that compounds across the marriage and the home. Remember co-regulation, the nervous system as the thermostat for the house. A parent living in chronic depletion isn't just suffering privately. They're broadcasting a dysregulated signal into every brain under that roof, all day, below everyone's awareness. The children calibrate to it. The partner calibrates to it. The whole system slowly organizes itself around the least stable nervous system in the building. This is the part the self-help world refuses to say plainly. Your unmanaged stress is not a personal matter you'll handle alone after everyone's asleep. It is an environmental condition your family is being raised inside. There is no wall thick enough to contain a chronically flooded nervous system. It seeps, it teaches, it shapes. And here's the cruelest mechanism of all. The cost hides inside things that look like love. The exhausted parent, running on flooded cortisol, reaches for the fastest relief to quiet the load. A drink to take the edge off. The phone to numb the noise. The screen handed to the child not as a gift, but as a moment of peace the parent desperately needs. None of it looks like damage. All of it looks like coping. And a watching brain, building a million connections a second, records every shortcut as the answer to the question, what do you do when life gets heavy? So the pattern doesn't just harm the child in the present, it transmits. The child inherits not your words about resilience, but your demonstrated method for handling overload. You can lecture about hard work at the dinner table, but the lesson that gets wired in is the one your nervous system performed at 9 p.m. when you thought no one was studying you. They were always studying you. This is how a struggle skips generations and then lands. The grandparents' scarcity built drive through hardship. The parents, determined to spare their children that hardship, removed it and removed the drive with it. And now a third generation arrives with every comfort and no engine. And no one in the family can quite explain why a child who is given everything seems unable to want anything. Stop and consider the quiet math of that. The thing the grandparents survived by accident became the thing the parents eliminated on purpose, and the elimination cost more than the hardship ever did. Here's the practical truth underneath all of it, the one I want you to carry out of this block. Every time you choose the easy regulation for yourself, the numbing shortcut over the harder return to steadiness, you're not just spending your own health. You're writing a line of code in a brain that will run it for 40 years. And every time you intercept your child's discomfort to spare yourself the difficulty of watching it, you're paying down your own stress at the price of their future capacity. The cost was never visible because it never arrived as a bill. It arrived as a slow erosion of drive, of resilience, of the family's collective ability to face difficulty and stay intact. A quiet hollowing, dressed in the clothes of a good life. But here is the turn. Everything we've described is a system. Cortisol, dopamine, plasticity, co-regulation, and systems can be re-engineered, not with willpower, not with another motivational push that fades by Thursday, with a specific, deliberate redesign of the inputs. That redesign is the blueprint, and it starts not with your child, but with the one nervous system you actually control. Let me give it to you now. The blueprint has one foundational rule, and it reverses the instinct of almost every parent alive. You do not start with the child. You start with your own nervous system, because you cannot install regulation in a brain you don't possess yourself. The thermostat sets the room, so you fix the thermostat first. Here is the re-engineering in 3 moves. The first move is to restore your own off switch. Remember chronic cortisol, the flood that hands the wheel to the amygdala and silences the wise part of you right when your family reads you closest. You don't fix that with more willpower at the door. You fix it upstream by building deliberate recovery into the day before depletion makes the choice for you. A real boundary around when work ends. A non-negotiable block that's yours alone. The morning walk, the waits, the quiet hour before the house wakes. This isn't self-indulgence. It's maintenance on the single most important instrument in the home. A parent who protects their own regulation isn't taking from the family. They're protecting the climate the whole family lives inside. The second move is the one that feels like cruelty and is actually the deepest love. You reinstall the gap. You stop closing the distance between your child's wanting and getting. You let boredom sit in the room without rushing a screen into it. You let a frustration run its course without intercepting it. You let them reach for something and have to wait. Every gap you preserve is a rep for their dopamine system and their prefrontal cortex. Drive and patience, built the only way they can be built. You're not withholding love, you're installing the engine. The third move is the repair. This is the part that frees you, so hear it clearly. You will get dysregulated, you'll snap, you'll reach for the shortcut, you'll fail the standard. The blueprint never asked for a calm parent. It asked for a parent who returns. The dysregulation followed by the visible coming back is the single most powerful regulation lesson a child can witness. Proof, wired into their developing brain, that a storm in the body is survivable and temporary. So when you lose it and then repair it, you haven't failed the blueprint. You've executed its most important line. 3 moves. Restore your off switch. Reinstall the gap. Master the repair. That's the re-engineering, not of your child, but of the system your child is being built inside. Now, If you've made it this far, let me say something to you directly. You're not the average viewer. Most people clicked away the moment this asked something of them instead of flattering them. You stayed through the part that implicated you, the part where the cost had your own fingerprints on it. That's rare. That's the small fraction of people who can hear a hard truth about themselves and lean in instead of away. Subscribe so the next blueprint finds you. And if this is landing somewhere real, if you recognized your own kitchen, your own exhaustion, your own 9 p.m. shortcut in any of this, then you already understand why it had to be said this plainly. Now let me close the loop I opened at the very start, because you can see it now. I told you there was a chemical conversation happening in your home that you couldn't hear. Here's what it's actually saying. It's not asking you to be calm. It's not asking you to be perfect or endlessly patient or to never come home heavy. It's asking you to be regulated enough to recover, honest enough to let your children struggle, and present enough to come back every time you slip. That's the whole inheritance. Not the house, not the device, not the spared discomfort. The demonstrated, repeated, lived-out proof that a human being can carry weight, lose their footing, and steady themselves again. And here is the hardest part. The part the motivational world will never say to you. This costs. It costs you the easy shortcut when you're depleted. It costs you the comfort of rescuing your child from the discomfort that's hard to watch. It costs you the years before the payoff arrives. Because the brain you're building won't show its strength for a decade or more. Before the applause comes the price. Before the strong adult comes the frustrated child you had the courage not to rescue. Before the regulated family comes the parent who did the unglamorous work of regulating themselves first. But there's a moment on the other side of that cost, a quiet one, years from now, that I want you to see before we finish. Because someone did this, and the change in them didn't look like what you'd expect. Let me show you. There's a 51-year-old man in a mid-sized town in Ohio who didn't transform the way the stories promise. No breakthrough. No single morning where everything changed. What happened to him was slower than that, and quieter, and that's exactly why it held. He was the reactive one. He knew it. He'd come home from a job that took more than it gave, and the smallest thing, a spilled cup, a raised voice from one of his 2 kids, would set off something in him faster than he could catch it. He'd snap. Then he'd feel the familiar shame, and to quiet it, he'd disappear into his phone on the couch until the house went to sleep. He wasn't a bad father. He was a depleted one, running the only pattern his nervous system had ever been handed by his own father before him. What changed wasn't his feelings. He didn't wake up calmer. He just understood finally what was actually happening, that the snap wasn't his character, it was his chemistry, the threat detector seizing the wheel from the depleted, flooded part of him. And that his kids weren't hearing his apologies. They were studying his recoveries, of which there had been almost none. So he started small. Embarrassingly small. He put a hard edge on when work ended. He took 20 minutes in the morning that belonged to no one but him. Nothing that would make a motivational reel. And then he did the thing that cost him the most because it ran against everything in him. The next time he snapped at his son over something that didn't matter, he came back. He sat down on the edge of the boy's bed an hour later and said plainly that he'd lost his temper, that it wasn't about the boy, and that he was working on coming back faster. No performance, just the return. He felt like a fraud doing it. He did it anyway. And then he did it again the next week, and the week after, because the snapping didn't stop. It just started getting shorter, and the coming back started getting quicker. Months passed before he noticed anything had shifted, and what he noticed wasn't in himself. It was in his son. The boy, 11 now, lost a game one afternoon, the kind of loss that used to mean a slammed door and an hour of sulking. And the father watched his son stand in the kitchen, visibly furious, breathe through it, and say, mostly to himself, "That's okay. I'll get it next time." Then go back outside. No intervention. No rescue. The boy had simply done, on his own, the exact thing he'd watched his father practice all those nights on the edge of the bed. The storm came. It got survived. It passed. That was the whole transformation. A boy who could lose and stay intact. There was no trophy, no triumph, nothing to post. Just a child quietly carrying a capacity that hadn't been there before, a capacity his father hadn't taught with a single word, only demonstrated, over and over, in the unglamorous act of returning. And here's what the man said about it later, the part that stays with me. He said he used to think being a good father meant his kids would never see him struggle. Now he understood it was the opposite. They needed to see him struggle, and then watch what he did next. The struggle was never the failure. Hiding the recovery had been the failure. He didn't become a calmer man. He became a man who came back. And his children, without instruction, became people who come back too. Notice what isn't in this story. No fortune reversed, no dramatic rescue, no overnight self. The change wasn't loud because the real ones rarely are. It was an identity shifting one repaired moment at a time until the new pattern was simply wired into two more brains under that roof, and would be, in time, into the brains they'd one day raise. This is what I meant when I said it costs. He paid in the discomfort of apologizing to a child, in the weeks of feeling like a fraud before the pattern took, in the long gap before any of it showed. He paid the price the motivational world hides, and the inheritance he installed was worth more than anything he could have bought. Which leaves one question. Because a regulated parent, a child who can struggle and recover, that's not just better parenting. It's something deeper. It changes who you become in the process. And that's where this finally lands. Here's what no one tells you about doing this work. You set out to fix your parenting, and somewhere along the way, it stops being about parenting at all. It becomes about who you are, because you cannot install regulation in a child without becoming a more regulated person yourself. You cannot reinstall the gap in their life without confronting the shortcuts in your own. You cannot model the recovery without actually recovering. The blueprint has a quiet trick built into it. Every move you make for your child forces a change in you first. You are the curriculum, which means you have to become the thing you want to teach. Sit with that, because it reframes everything we've said. You thought this was about raising better kids. It was always about raising yourself, using the most powerful motivation a human being will ever have, the small set of eyes that are always watching, as the reason to finally do the work you'd have postponed forever if it were only for you. This is the part that changes your identity. Not your behavior, your identity. There's a difference, and the brain knows it. Remember neuroplasticity, the slow chisel. When you first restore your off switch, first preserve a gap, first force yourself back to repair a moment you'd rather forget. It feels like acting, like wearing a role that isn't yours. That's normal. That's a new neural path being cut against the grain of the old one, and the old one is still wider, still easier, still calling. But repetition is the chisel. And there's a threshold. The philosophers saw it long before the neuroscientists confirmed it, where a behavior practiced long enough stops being something you do and becomes something you are. The patience stops being performed and becomes a trait. The recovery stops being effortful and becomes reflex. The role becomes the self. This is how a person actually changes. Not by deciding to be different, by repeating a different action until the tissue reorganizes around it and the new pattern runs on its own. You don't think your way into a new identity. You practice your way into one. And the watching child is what keeps you practicing past the point where you'd have quit alone. So consider what you're really building when you do this. Not just a stable kid, a version of yourself that didn't exist before. Steadier, more honest about your own failures, more able to carry weight without passing it to the people you love. The parent becomes the person the parenting required. And that person doesn't clock out when the children grow up. That person is who you've become. Here's the deeper turn, the one that closes something in you. Most of us carry a pattern we inherited without consenting to it. A way of handling stress, of reaching for relief, of going quiet or going sharp under pressure, handed down from a parent who got it from theirs. You didn't choose it. It was installed in you before you could decide. And for most of a life, people simply run the inherited code and then pass it forward without ever touching it. What you're doing, if you do this, is something rare. You're reaching back into the lineage and editing it. You're taking the pattern that was handed to you, refusing to transmit it unchanged, and writing a different line for everyone downstream. The child who learns to recover instead of to numb will hand recovery to their own children. The thing you repair in yourself doesn't stop with you. It propagates forward, generations you'll never meet, running code you chose instead of code you merely received. That's not parenting anymore. That's authorship. You become the point in your family's history where an old pattern ended and a better one began. The person who absorbed the inheritance looked at it honestly and decided what to keep and what to let die with them. And the strange grace of it is this. You'll likely never get full credit because the deepest things you change will look, from the outside, like nothing happened. A child who can lose a game and stay whole. A home with a little more steadiness in the air. A pattern that didn't get passed on. Quiet, invisible, structural. But you'll know. You'll know that the weather in your house shifted because you became someone who could hold it. That the engine in your child got built because you had the harder love to let them struggle. That a line in the family code got rewritten on your watch. Which brings us all the way back to where we started, to that chemical conversation you couldn't hear. Because by now, you can hear it. And it was never saying what you thought. Let's go back to the very first thing I said to you. There's a chemical conversation happening in your home right now, and you can't hear a word of it. You believed me then, but you didn't know what it meant. You probably pictured something delicate, something about feelings, about atmosphere, about being a warmer or gentler presence. That's not what it was. Here's what that conversation has been saying the entire time. Underneath everything, your children are not learning what you tell them. They're learning what you are. Not your values as spoken, your values as performed by your nervous system at the end of a hard day. Not the resilience you preach, the recovery you demonstrate or fail to. The whole inheritance is being transmitted in a language below words, and you've been speaking it fluently your entire life without knowing the tongue. And now you know it. Which means you can never again pretend the conversation isn't happening. That's the weight I'm leaving you with, and I won't soften it, because you didn't come this far to be flattered. You came to see something true. So here it is, plainly. The mental health you tend to in yourself is not a private project you'll get to once the family is handled. It is the family being handled. It's the most consequential parenting you will ever do, and almost none of it happens in front of your children. It happens in whether you restore your own off switch. in whether you have the heart or love to let them struggle, in whether you come back every single time you slip. That's the blueprint, not a technique, a way of becoming. Now I'm going to ask you for two things, and I'm asking because of what this actually is. First, send this to 5 people who need it, not the people who will merely agree with it. The 5 who are exhausted, who love their families, and can feel something quietly going wrong and don't have the name for it yet. The ones living inside the kind, well-intentioned lie. You have the name for it now. Give it to them. This is the rare thing worth interrupting someone's day for. Second, leave a comment, an honest one. Tell me where this landed, where it implicated you, where you recognized your own 9 p.m. shortcut or your own rescued child. And then tell me the next blueprint you want, the pattern in your own life or your own family you most need to understand and rewire. I read these. They decide what gets built next, and then close the screen and go be in the room with them, because the work was never going to happen here. Here's the last thing. You started this thinking the most important thing you could give your family was success. The security, the comfort, the spared hardship, the better life than the one you had. And the truth turned out to be almost the reverse of what you were told. The success doesn't sustain the family's mental health. The mental health is what sustains everything else. You can't hear the conversation in your home, but your children can. And they're not listening to your words. They're becoming your nervous system. So make it one worth inheriting.